Slipstream Creations. This project comes to us from a customer who is looking for a smaller dual sport bike, something that would be fun and nimble and easy to ride, but also something that would be easy to maintain. And after looking at a few options together and exploring some things, we decided on this 2018 Suzuki VanVan 200. And the VanVan really is about as approachable as a bike can get. They are super fun and super easy to ride, and as a bonus for this customer, this is actually a fuel-injected model. The one big problem we had, though, is that we were looking to build a bike that was a little bit more of an aggressive dual sport look. And the problem with the VanVan is that I would really describe it as sort of more cute and quirky than aggressive, so we definitely had some things to figure out to really make this work. And the real twist to this project is that it had to be built entirely as a bolt-on kit. The customer had already picked up an identical VanVan 200 like this at home, and the plan was for us to build this into a completely finished bike, but every single part had to be built in duplicate so that he could build a twin version of this bike for his daughter. That meant we couldn't cut the back half of the frame off and weld on a custom subframe. It meant we couldn't weld new tank mounts to the front of the frame as well. It also meant that the wiring on the bike had to be done in such a way that it was as plug and play as possible. We definitely had our work cut out for us to make this work. When you look at this finished bike, one of the more obvious changes that we made is to the front tire here. Now from the factory, these VanVans come with a 14-inch wide rear rim and tire, but a much narrower 18-inch rim in the front. Now this customer liked the idea of putting a fat tire on the front as well, so we were able to get a rear rim from Suzuki. We had Buchanan make some custom stainless steel spokes for us so that we could use the stock front hub in that rear rim. And then luckily, the front fork here is actually wide enough to fit the fat front tire without any clearance problems. So we were able to update that front tire. We powder coated the hubs front and back and the rims in black, and then we put these Bridgestone tires on here that really give this thing an over-the-top look. One of the other big considerations we had to make was what to do with the tank. We ended up settling on a couple of tanks from old Honda CB360s, and luckily we build a lot of old 70s Hondas here, so we had a couple of CB360 tanks on hand, and these actually work really well. The size is right, the shape is right. We were able to mount it a little bit further forward and a little bit higher than the stock tank, and didn't have any clearance problems up front here with the fork at all. But there were a couple of big challenges using these tanks. One of them was just getting the tank mounts done and built, because we had to relocate the front and rear tank mounts, but we had to do it without any welding. So we were able to fabricate some front mounts that moved the tank forward a couple of inches and up a couple of inches. And then in the rear, we were able to take our custom subframe here and integrate the rear tank mount into it up just a little bit higher than the stock mount. One of the other big challenges in using these old tanks is that this bike is fuel injected. So we had to deal with a return fuel line, and then it also had a fuel level sender that was inside the tank. We did manage to weld a return line bung on the inside of the tank up under the tunnel, and then the fuel level sender we mounted in the tank here, essentially in the same location as stock, so that we didn't have to modify any of the wiring. Once the metalwork was done, these tanks were sealed and painted, one in gloss red and another in gloss black with no graphics, which really give this bike a bit of an understated look in contrast with the really wild fat tires and dual front headlights. We did update all the lighting on this bike. The headlight was converted to a dual headlight unit with LEDs, and we custom fabricated a mount here with a custom perimeter guard around the lights as well. We installed a set of Moto Gadget pin-style LED turn signals right here into the headlight mount. On the rear here, we fabricated a couple of custom turn signal stalks here to mount the Moto Gadget turn signals right into, and these actually double as bolts that help hold the rear fender in place. For the brake light, we used a low-profile LED brake light taillight unit right here on the fender. Now this particular VanVan came stock with white fenders, but some of these VanVans came with black fenders from the factory. So what we ended up doing was buying a set of stock black fenders here and shortening them about 4 inches to give them a little bit more of a streamlined look, but still help protect us a little bit from the elements. Probably the most challenging part of this build was figuring out what to do with the subframe and the seat and make all of this look cohesive and not like a bunch of individual bolt-on parts. And not being able to cut and weld the frame, we really had to do a lot of experimenting to figure out what would work best. The thing that's really nice about this configuration is that we didn't have to touch the battery or anything that was under the stock seat. We actually have a little bit more space under the seat now than we used to, so we can stash the factory toolkit under there, which works out great since we removed the tool bag from the stock location on the rear fender. We made a custom steel seat pan here that obviously not only works with the new subframe, but it also needed to come up over the hump of the rear fender here behind it as well. We upholstered this with a clean and simple pleated black seat cover, which gives this bike just a nice classic look. To cover up the stock airbox and all the guts underneath, we fabricated these steel side panels that bolt up to these tabs that we included on the subframe here. We were able to bend the creases into the covers so that they give us just enough clearance for the equipment underneath, but they also kind of follow the inverse of the angle of the lines of the tank here, and all of these lines sort of flow to the same vanishing point along the belt line of the bike here. To finish everything up, we swapped out the stock chrome handlebar for this black handlebar that is a little bit cleaner looking, but still has a similar rise and a similar feel to stock. We also swapped out the stock speedometer and indicator lights for this TrailTech Vapor digital unit. We've got that attached to a custom fabricated mount that actually bolts right into the stock speedometer mounting bolts. Overall, the parameters around this build made it a pretty challenging project, but we're definitely happy with how it turned out. This bike is a ton of fun to ride, and we love the way it looks. And we really think if you take a step back and look at it, you could almost mistake this for a factory bike. But if you put it up next to a stock VanVan, the changes are pretty dramatic, and that's exactly what we were after. Let us know in the comments what you think, if you would have done anything differently, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and like.